Okay, I've spoken at a number of these events recently on this specific topic of digital shoplifting. And one of the questions I often get asked by people is how you link something like physical, like shoplifting, to the digital environment. And really, the way I put that in perspective is to consider the way in which we buy is changing. The way in which shoplifters are acting is also changing. If you paint a picture of the UK high street, currently around 17% of the UK retail high street is empty. There's less shops, less retailers. We're at a time in the economy where travel and fuel are at their peak of expense, and also there's a scarcity of disposable income. If you look in a traditional retail environment at the moment, it's predominantly covered with discount and own brand products. So actually, from a shoplifter's perspective, the prospect of travelling into town using the last parts of your disposable income to run the gauntlet of a burly security guard and the risk of prosecution isn't particularly an attractive prospect. However, with goods lost in transit fraud, effectively what you do is bring the shoplifting to your own home. Wouldn't you prefer to shoplift from the comfort of your own sofa to the dulcet tones of Jeremy Kyle? You can even, with mobile technology, shoplift from the pub. So I'd like you to bear that in mind as I run through my presentation. And essentially, what I'm hoping to give you an illustration of is how home shopping and e-commerce has allowed the shoplifter and the traditional methodologies that the shoplifter uses to change and to evolve to the online environment. So first and foremost, I wanted to paint a picture of what actually goes missing. So there was a recent piece of research done by the IMRG which stated that 1 in 1,000 orders go missing. That's directly from the carriers themselves, and that's them stating exactly from what goes out and what is returned, what goes missing. So actually, if the entire size of the prize with regards to goods lost in transit was only 1 in 1,000 orders, would I be standing here? If this was the size of the problem, really, this would maybe be an SLA meeting with one of your carriers rather than necessarily a presentation. But actually, the reason why I'm stood here is because Transactis have unique access to a syndicated data view of a product called Claims ID. And what Claims ID allows us to see is that actually the 1 in 1,000 items which are being reported by the carriers and IMRG are not actually all the items which are being claimed for. In fact, for certain products, it can be as high as 1 in 100 orders. So the Claims ID database is a syndicated data service which contains information from 14 major retail brands. That's information on goods lost in transit claims. It spans several years. And what we're seeing from the goods lost in transit database is that actually some brands and some products are specifically being targeted by goods lost in transit fraudsters. And essentially, for something as high as a 1 in 100 order, the types of products you're looking at there aren't the traditional things that you would expect. Actually, some of these products, in fact, the 1 in 100 was Adidas hoodies. These are retailer under £30, but are actually being specifically targeted because of a number of reasons. There's two phrases that I'd like to coin. They are pubable and eBayable. If an item is desirable, if it has great resale value, if you're able to quite easily get rid of it or refund that item, then actually for a goods lost in transit fraudster, it's a real key target. So with 1 in 1,000 actual goods being lost and up to 1 in 100 claims, are your customers telling you the full story? Well, I'd like to discuss a term that's called first-party fraud. So what first-party fraud essentially says is that your own customers, using their own identities and their own information, will actually give you an incorrect version of the truth. And when it comes to goods lost in transit, this can be something as simple as saying the item hasn't arrived or the item wasn't in a package. But in real terms, what does that actually mean for retailers? Well, the unfortunate news is that some customers and some fraudsters have worked out how to break your system. What do I mean by that? If you order 4 items from a retailer online, chances are, if you order them all at the same time, all 4 of those items will turn up in the same packet. But actually, it's quite easy then for a customer to claim that one of those items wasn't in the packet. And what we tend to see with the Claims ID database is it's often the most expensive one that isn't in the packet. One of the issues with goods lost in transit fraud is that it's often considered to be a friendly fraud. It's faceless, it's low risk. Again, it goes back to the point that actually goods lost in transit is about your ability to challenge a customer and their version of the truth. It's characterized heavily by opportunistic behavior. So one example that we had recently was someone ordering from a very well-known online book retailer. Every time they ordered, their books would be delivered 2 streets down. Luckily, the guy that lived 2 streets down had a good relationship and would actually drop those books round. But if this was the case, and he was ordering an iPad and there wasn't that relationship there, would that iPad have found its way back round to the correct person? I probably doubt it. One of the other issues around goods lost in transit fraud is that it's difficult to prove. Often retailers are left with the burden of proof. It's proving your word against the customers. And with brand strategy, that's often a difficult thing to address. If you're effectively calling a customer potentially a liar that they've received an item, it's often something that's very difficult to stomach. And as such, a lot of retailers go on to absorb the costs associated with this. And I'll talk a little bit more about the costs shortly. So there's some typical kind of scenarios here that you might hear from your customers. So often the customer call center agents will hear things like, my DVD never arrived, I returned the shoes to you. This illustrates a couple of different points. So first and foremost, on that outward dispatch, actually getting the item to the customer and proving that the item has reached that customer. But then also one area that's often unconsidered by retailers is that of return. Often there's some different timescales involved with return of the items, and there might be a policy wherein those items are refunded up front, and then it could be up to 7 weeks, 10 days before the items actually return back into the distribution hub. So one of the issues that we see within the Claims ID syndicated database is that people are receiving parcels back that don't contain the goods they were supposed to, or contain slightly different goods. One example for a large mobile telecoms provider was they would have a customer that would order an iPhone 4, and actually when they opened the parcel, when it was returned back to them, there would be an iPhone 3 in there. Similar product, you know, fairly similar to all intents and purposes, but from a value perspective, very different. So it's very hard for retailers to challenge when that's the case, without sufficient information, proof, and insight available to them. Again, another example, I ordered 4, but only 3 arrived. But one of the challenges that I would give to retailers is actually some of the policies which you have in place are there to support this type of fraud. Actually, some retailers that I've spoken to will have a refund or redeliver policy for any items under £20. This means no questions asked, the item is either redispatched or refunded. Can you imagine the implications of that on profitability if those are false claims? And as you've seen from the numbers earlier on in the presentation, potentially a large volume of those claims will be false. It's also around customer strategy. So a lot of brands believe that their customers don't do these types of things. Our customers wouldn't lie to us and tell us they haven't received something. Well, actually, it's not necessarily your hardened fraudsters that will do this. It can be a white-collar crime. There's one very well-known wine distribution company who had a doctor call in to their call centre to claim that he hadn't received a case of wine. While the call centre operative put that person on hold, they actually heard the doctor in the background talking to one of his friends, saying, this is the 3rd time I've done this, and every time they send me a new case. It's not a specific fraudulent level crime. It's actually down to the propensity and the attitude of that individual to risk and to take the chance. And if there are holes in the system, then they will abuse them. One of the other policies I've heard from a number of retailers is around, we give people a 3 strikes and you're out policy. Well, 3 strikes and you're out, essentially, to a hardened glit fraudster, is the equivalent of buy 1, get 2 free. Because essentially, you're saying to them it's acceptable for them to make 2 claims for items that have never received, and you will honour that. So actually, having information about that person's claims history, not only in your brand, but actually elsewhere from other brands, could inform your decision in the future about how you would approach that individual. So I wanted to try and paint an illustration around what this is costing. So there's not only the physical cost of the goods themselves, so if you're redispatching an item or if you're refunding an item, then you're losing sales revenue. But actually there's some other costs associated with handling a goods lost in transit claim. In a recent piece of IMRG research, they put this together to be around £11.49. This was, I would say, a conservative estimate. And this is based on the operational expenditure. So this is things such as phone conversations to the customer to resolve these issues, the cost of actually handling the goods, the cost of redelivery, and all these other types of things which are included within there. But actually, there's some other implications. Think about the effect of goods lost in transit on the actual profitability for an organisation. So the average value that we've got here is around £35. So this is talking about the specific profitability lost from the item. If you've got an average retail price of an item of £40 or £50, and then you're having to redispatch the same item, then actually you're losing the profit from that second item, and that has an effect, and a roll-on effect. In fact, when we do some research with some retailers, we actually see that the effect of goods lost in transit claims, albeit it may be only 8% of the total sales revenue, can be up to 1 to 5% of gross margin that they are actually losing as a result of goods lost in transit claims, when you take into account all these additional costs. So I talked about 1 in 100. So how do we come to that number? How are we sure about that? Well, actually, in truth, very few retailers are recording in detail the goods lost in transit claims. If they are, they might be in different systems. The information certainly won't be feeding into their loss prevention teams or upfront into their actual customer information. So when customers are placing orders, is there any information which is being fed back in at that front end? Also, it varies by brand, by product, and by season. So one great example we've got from some of the anecdotes we've had from retailers is around some kettles. So actually, kettles you wouldn't traditionally associate as a high-risk item from a goods lost in transit claim perspective, really, not particularly desirable. But when they fall below that £20 refund or replace boundary, then actually they're a very easy item to get hold of. So actually looking at a product level, what items specifically are these claims falling onto can be a very important way to assess exactly how much you're losing. As I mentioned, the costs eat at your profits and they present significant opportunity costs. For every item you redispatch, that's an item that you could have sold at full retail price. That's a loss of profitability. That's a loss of sales revenue. If you refund an item, that's a loss of sales revenue. So one of the challenges I'd actually like to give to people in the session today is if you actually looked at some of your refunds or your redeliveries, would you be able to explain why those have occurred? Would you be able to give, in all certain terms, that actually those items had gone missing? So I mentioned the Claims ID database. We did some analysis of the claims within the database, and what we found was pretty astonishing. In fact, I would say it's counterintuitive. Traditionally, I would suggest that a customer that has a poor experience when they're ordering from an online retailer, i.e. their item does not turn up, their item is late, they order a package and only 3 items are in that actual package and there should have been 4. Those customers, I would suggest, probably don't revisit those retailers. Or if they do, it's not on a regular basis after that type of experience. So actually, when we looked into the database, what we saw that was people that have already made a claim are 40% more likely to make another claim. And essentially what this is saying is if someone has a successful claim, that actually they'll quite happily claim again. And this can be a genuine reason, but it can also be another reason. It could be a potentially first-party fraud. On the flip side to that, actually one of the return on investment metrics that we look at when we're analysing claims for people is around the effect on the positive experience. So for good customers, a claim, a goods lost in transit claim, handled well at the first point of interaction with that customer can actually increase the propensity of that customer to purchase from that brand again. So actually, there's both sides. If you're handling a claim well, your customers are more impressed. If you're handling those claims where they've got previous history with a little bit more skepticism, then actually you can protect yourself. So just wanted to summarize really some of the statistics which I've talked about. So actually, when we're talking about 1 in 1,000 items, according to the IMRG research, are actually going missing by the carriers. So that's cause for concern, but as I say, that's more a conversation with your carrier. When you look at the number of items that are actually going missing, this 1 in 100, this starts to flag as something perhaps more important and more urgent to be looked at. But when you then look in further detail at that 40%, those people that are making multiple claims, actually, what you then go on to see is that it's up to potentially 1 in 10 for some of those people. So of the 40% that are making multiple claims, they're making multiple claims on 1 in 10 orders, and even higher than that. So actually, their propensity to claim, when you look at the number of items that actually go missing, the number of claims elsewhere, those specific individuals have a very high propensity to claim. So there's a couple of challenges really that I wanted to put. And one of those was, if you were looking at your refund or your redelivery, could you locate that parcel? Do you have the information, the tracking information, the actual information about that customer? And if a parcel was actually claimed as missing today, could your frontline staff at that point, when they're interacting with the customer, identify whether that claim was a genuine claim or whether it was potentially a fraudulent or first-party fraud claim? That's something that's worth considering. And for a lot of retailers, I'm afraid that second process is often down to the person on the end of the phone. It's down to the customer call center operative. It's down to their ability to understand, manage, interpret the detail of that claim. So often it's on a very ad hoc basis, and it means that customers are treated differently and there's no standard policy. Another quote that we have is around the fact that a genuine claim handled badly can encourage fraudulent behaviour. Essentially, what I mentioned was this opportunistic nature of goods lost in transit claims and fraudsters. Essentially, if someone has an experience that allows them to make a claim easily, without being challenged, without any fear of reprisal or prosecution, then they are likely to do that again. In fact, they'll do that again and they'll tell other people about it, and they will also do it. So the issue with these types of claims is that they can snowball and spread like wildfire. But the good news about goods lost in transit claims is if they are handled well, if there is information available, then it can work the other way. So there was an example that we had from a retailer, and it was a claim that came in, and it was for a pair of these, which are Dr. Dre Beats Audio headphones, so I'm told. And essentially, what happened, there was a customer that called into their call center to claim that he had not received these items. They had never been signed for. The call center operative had a signature, but the customer claimed this was not his signature. So despite the feeling from the customer call center operative that actually perhaps this wasn't a genuine claim, they had to refund it. So all fine and good, the customer went away. That customer then called into to the same retailer actually to order a bike online. And they'd ordered the bike got dispatched, and the customer call center operative, as a customer service experience exercise, decided to call that customer to check whether or not they'd received that bike, to which the customer said, yes, I've received the bike, absolutely fine. The customer call center operative then asked, so actually, who signed for your bike? And the customer said, it was actually my mother that signed for it. Well, actually, the retailer they ordered the bike off and the retailer they ordered the headphones off were part of the same group and part of the Claims ID database. So they were sharing information. So what the person could then see was that the signature for the Beats Audio headphones was actually the same as the bike. So they then challenged the customer to say, you've said that your mother has signed for this, when actually the headphones which you claim to not have received were also signed for by your mother. So essentially this was a false claim. Using the Claims ID data, they had end-to-end data and a view, a single customer view of that customer. They were able to investigate the specific claim, use evidence and information to challenge that customer, and as a result, that led to recovered costs because the actual cost of those headphones was recovered from the customer. The good news about an experience like that is, for that customer, he won't be trying that again. He won't be going out to that retailer again and trying to make false claims. Also, he won't be telling his friends about that, or he won't be telling his friends he'll be able to do that. He'll be telling his friends that if they try and make a false claim from this retailer, that actually they risk prosecution. So the good news is that there are some retailers out there who are actively using goods lost in transit insight and information to challenge customers. One of the challenges that we always come up against when we talk to retailers about this is that the customer's always right. The customer, you've always got to put the customer first. Well, that is, to all intents and purposes true, but actually by challenging effectively and having information available to you, you can understand the detail of that claim. Actually, what you tend to find when you're asking the right question of a customer is that either the item itself then turns up or that it's not necessarily the full parcel that's gone missing. So one of the sound bites we often hear from some of the companies using the Claims ID database is that people tend to find the item in their porch once they're challenged on the subject matter. So often what you tend to find is just by challenging with a little bit of information and a little bit of insight, actually you're able to nip these types of claims in the bud. But actually if you have that information and insight available, then when a genuine claim comes through the door, you can handle that more effectively. So there's one retailer in particular that we're working with that potentially are getting ahead of the curve when it comes to goods lost in transit fraud. So ShopDirect Group are a retailer that are taking this issue seriously. As you can see from the statistics here, they send out a large volume of parcels each year. They have a large volume of customers, and hence they have a large volume of goods lost in transit claims. They have well-known brands which are attractive, which are pubbable or eBayable for people. But one of the things which ShopDirect want to do is to balance this differentiation between the customer experience, managing the potential of fraud, and also giving the customers the satisfaction that they want. So some of the challenges recently that have come to light are around things such as creating more convenient deliveries. So actually non-POD deliveries can actually cause a problem from goods lost in transit perspective, but can be more attractive from a customer perspective in that they don't have to wait around or go to a raw mail depot to pick up the item. But actually if you're sending out something without a tract or without a signature, then you can put yourself at risk because those items could then be claimed for. I think the way that ShopDirect Group are really addressing the issue of glit is with a healthy skepticism. They challenge customers effectively. They use data, insight, and defined processes to specifically walk the customer through a journey and understand the information about that customer, their propensity to claim, and also then their behaviour. So rather than take my word for it, I've got some audio here from Chris Heighton, who's the carriage director at ShopDirect Group. To put Chris Heighton's role in perspective, he's responsible for the end-to-end movement of goods, so all goods going out, all goods going in, and it's around 30 million items per annum. The types of goods he's responsible for can range from anything from a CD or a swatch up to a 250 kilogram shed or a fridge. So I'd like to just play you a few words from Chris just to talk through his experience of goods lost in transit and also the use of the Claims ID database.
As a long-established home shopping company, we have over 100 years' experience of distance selling. So managing glit is something that's part of our DNA. About 10 years ago, we put together a system that would allow us to see information on individual customers and individual deliveries and establish where the glit hotspots were. What's becoming increasingly apparent to us is that information would be much, much more valuable if it was syndicated with other distance sellers so that we got a clear picture of how these customers interact with the whole of the market. In a perfect world, I would like to be able to decide exactly which carrier and which service to use for every single customer order based on this analysis. Unfortunately, my systems won't let me do that at the moment. But what I can do, for certain customers who might perhaps have previously made more claims than we would have expected, is ensure that every delivery we send to them requires a signature before it can be handed over.
Some interesting points that Chris raises there with regards to the syndication of data, because some of the statistics which I've given you are based on the Claims ID database. So actually, the claims at the moment can be up to 1 in 100. And if these people, these opportunistic or potentially organised goods lost in transit fraudsters are hitting one retailer, then actually they'll be hitting a number of other retailers. If people have policies in place, such as the 3 strikes and you're out, then these people will move around different retailers. So that emphasises the importance of sharing access to this information up front when those claims are made, to be able to understand the propensity of that individual across multiple brands, multiple products to make a claim. And if you have this information available, and if it is shared, it gives you the ability to challenge, it gives you the ability to recover, and it gives you the ability to protect your organisation from this type of fraud. So I've mentioned in my presentation a little bit around the Claims ID database. Well, what the Claims ID database effectively is a syndicated data view of goods lost in transit claims. Currently, it contains 14 major retail brands contributing information around the claims themselves, the orders, and then also there's delivery and logistic information which feeds into the database. This syndicated data view allows you to see the behaviour of a consumer across multiple brands. Therefore, at the first interaction with that consumer, you have an upfront indication of their propensity to claim and their behaviour elsewhere. And that's done through their claims ratio, which is the volume of orders to claims. It even includes information such as the value of these claims. So if you find that they've placed 3 orders and 2 out of the 3 orders were actually for claims, but the first order was a low value order and the 2 subsequent orders were very high value orders, then actually you might address that consumer in a slightly different way and handle their claims slightly differently. But essentially what the Claims ID database allows you to do is reference this data and then build MI and analysis for your own internal purposes as well. So as I mentioned, the database itself contains all the transactional information for that retailer. It's anonymized for anyone else in the syndicated pool, but essentially what you do see is that consumer's behavior across multiple brands. So at Transactis, we're doing a number of things to try and understand in more detail the size of the issue, one of which is we're running a goods lost in transit survey. So this survey aims to work with retailers to understand across the marketplace for all retailers, all online retailers, what the size of the problem is. How effective are retailers being at measuring the size of this problem? In addition to that, we have a number of other resources available to us. So we've built a specific return on investment calculator, which allows you to assess the size of the problem for your business. It also looks at the other dynamics outside of the specific costs for the products, such as the implications on profit, the indirect costs as well. So it will build a full picture of the size of the issue. And as I've mentioned, for some retailers, this could potentially mean, if they address the issue of goods lost in transit, increasing gross profit by between 1% to 5%. In addition, over the up and coming months, we're going to be running a number of webinars, and off the back of those, we'll be providing out a number of white papers as well. So you have my information on the slide here. There's my telephone number, there's my email address. If anything that I've mentioned during this presentation is of interest, or you have any questions that you either want to raise now or after this, then by all means get in touch. We would offer to work with you to understand the size of the problem, to help you put together the internal business case to actually understand how big the problem is for you. We have a stand at the event also, so by all means, please come up and speak to me at the stand as well. But one of the challenges I want you to take back into your business is really to go back and ask the question. Understand your current process for handling these goods lost in transit claims. understand how much information is being captured and the processes that your staff are going through to challenge these claims, and also to understand how you are able to improve this process. So if any of these things are of interest to you, then by all means come and speak to me. Thank you very much.